All right, well, it's 2 o'clock, so I think maybe we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a small group today, but maybe some other people will trickle in and join us. So thank you to those of you who are here with us today. Welcome to the Small Firms Roundtable February event, which was postponed as many events were from last week. I hope everybody is doing well and on the other side of that. And if you're still dealing with the fallout of that, our hearts go out to you and whatever challenges may face you. I know that we've got some resources through AIA Austin. If you need help with anything, please reach out to us and we'll try to point you in the right direction if we can. So today I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Shaney Clemmons, who is the proprietor of Shademaker Studio, a landscape architecture firm here in Austin. I actually have the distinct honor of also sharing a studio space with Shaney. We met about a year ago now when I think she had been in for a month and I came in, and it's been wonderful to have gotten to know her. I now count her as a dear friend, as well as an incredible colleague and a very talented landscape architect. And she has a wonderful team. And it's just been a lot of fun to be in the next room. So we're going to kind of speak a little bit about we when I brought this idea up to Shaney, she told me that there's now kind of this newly formed group from the American Society of Landscape Architects in Texas. There is a Texas chapter, but they kind of have a little offshoot that's more targeted to our central region. So it's kind of the Central Texas chapter of the ASLA, of which Shaney is one of the leaders. And when I was bringing up this concept to her, she said, "Oh, we should make this kind of a collaboration." And I think that their goal is to try to, maybe even use kind of the AIA Austin model to expand their reach and expand their audience and get the profession of landscape architecture out into the community in a more robust way, which I was all for, of course. So we've kind of teamed up with that Central Texas chapter. And for those of you that are joining us from the world of landscape architecture, welcome. You're always welcome to any AIA Austin events as well, but happy to kind of start this collaboration and hopefully we can find other ways in the future to collaborate as well. So before we get into the meat of our discussion, I would like to thank our sponsors for this year. They are up on your screen. They are Mend Services, Syntex Sash and Door, and Knight Construction. I don't believe I have any constituents here from our sponsors, but very generous of them to support the Small Firms Roundtable this year. So we thank them deeply and look forward to a strong 2021. We're off to a great start. And here we go with Shaney Clemmons. Shaney, do you want to say anything to our audience before we get into our questions?
Well, sure. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thanks, Sean, for asking me to participate. I feel really excited to talk about, small business things and myself, and just I know that Sean he sent out kind of a question for me, to kind of think about and lead the conversation. But I would like to say, if anybody has questions or wants me to elaborate on anything more as we go, go ahead. I think, Sean, is it okay if they just ask a question, hop in?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up, because obviously we've got an intimate group here. So this is very informal. So I do have kind of a series of questions that I've posed to Shaney that we'll go through. And I hope to kind of highlight yeah, obviously she is a small firm as well in the landscape architecture world. So she shares a lot of the same burdens and triumphs that we do, or that small architecture firms do as well. And I'm hoping that we can use this as an opportunity to sort of hear her experience, primarily as a woman-owned, woman-led small business, and how other women and men, quite frankly, that are thinking about starting their own firms or currently leading their own firms can benefit from some of her insight, because I think she has a lot of interesting things going on to sort of expand her presence, both professionally and on she has some very interesting social media campaigns that I would like to discuss with her. So yeah, I just thought this would be, it kind of checks a lot of boxes, I guess, that I think that provide great overlap, and furthermore, we want to kind of talk about the collaboration between our two fields and how we can, maybe better achieve that, or I guess approach it from a good vantage point. So I think maybe to kick things off, Shaney, I just, if you could share with us just maybe a little bit of your background and work history. I know you hail from the Northwest, so you spent some time up there as well before you made your way down to Texas, at which you seem very much at home. So yeah, just kind of give us a small background.
Okay, sure. So my name is Shaney Clemmons, and my company is Shademaker Studio. I graduated from the University of Idaho. I am from Idaho. When I graduated in 1997, I moved to Seattle, and I lived and practiced landscape architecture there for 17 years. When I was there, I worked at some of the more renowned firms in town, GGN and Jones & Jones, who's old school, like first landscape architecture and architecture firm that was integrated. And, Lauren Stanley, I thought maybe she would be on the call today. I met Lauren Stanley when I worked at Jones & Jones. So my background has always been collaborative. So when I moved to Austin in 2013, that I moved down here to work at Markward Design, which is a design build firm. And that was a choice that was a little bit random for me. I wanted to get out of Seattle after the recession and after some personal things were wrapping up. And I kind of interviewed, but I was doing my interviews with intention on really like looking at what was missing from my skill set and where, kind of wanted to learn more. And so I decided to take a design build position. And I stayed at Mark's place for, I think, 4.5 years before starting Shademaker Studio. That was a landscape design build company, but I mean, this very similar in that the collaboration for, an opportunity for us to collaborate together as architects and landscape architects was still there. And I think that at Shademaker, before I went out on my own, I'll just say that I asked a lot of people for their recommendation, and what was important to me was that I was starting a business and feel like filling a void or a niche that wasn't already being filled by somebody else. There are excellent landscape architects in Austin, Texas, so I wanted to make sure that I was offering services that other people weren't. And so the questions that I asked, like Ann Turner from Studio A Group. I talked to Paul Clayton. I just had such a great network of architects after working at Markward Design to kind of just get their feedback. And the questions that I asked, and so I don't know if anybody on the group is interested in starting their own business, but I feel like this is good information. So my questions to them were like, what makes you hire a certain landscape architect one over the other? Is it just the skill? What are the other components? And the topics that really, I guess the responses that I got that really stuck out in my mind from asking those questions to different people were that, they like landscape architects are usually a sub to the architecture team. And, what makes a good landscape architect is somebody that takes, solves problems and takes things off of your plate. So I really try to structure what I do in the office in that regard, where we're problem solvers, we're team players, we're providing information that really keeps the project moving forward. So, aside from that, there's of course aesthetics and skill and just personality, but I think, that was really the thread of I guess me starting Shademaker is like, that was what I was striving to do. So I've implemented techniques, in my business to do that, and I hope that I am. I see that there's a couple architects on this call that I'm working with currently, so they can chime in whether or not this is successful.
Elizabeth says you are.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah. So
well, cool. So what? Yeah. What?
Shademaker does like primarily residential.
Okay.
Work. And then I would say it's probably 75% residential, and the other is commercial.
Cool. I guess, as you're designing, maybe you could describe some, I guess, what your more granular landscape interests are, whether that be kind of a thesis of plant material, I guess just a response to our particular climate, sort of part and parcel to this. One of the two I mentioned the Instagram campaigns that Shaney has, which are great. There's a plant profile series, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is, solely based on plants in our area, things that you can consider, things that you can learn about that you can incorporate into your own projects or might be good choices for projects in Central Texas. And then you have the Hedge Pledge endeavor as well. So I wondered if you could kind of talk about your interest in terms of what I imagine maybe you have a starting point, and then you use that sort of baseline interest to then develop something that's more site specific, client specific, etc.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I could go on for days about plants, but the campaigns that Sean's talking about on Instagram, the plant profile is again kind of goes back to the first question that I was talking about, if like what services can we provide. So I'm a big believer in sharing of information, and I think that the more information I can share, whether it's plant information or how to write a budget, that I feel like the more people that are out in the universe that are sharing and collaborating together, the better off we are as landscape architects, but also just strengthening our profession altogether. So really the plant profile is, just highlighting plants that work, or plants that I, personally somebody in the office likes. There's, we had a freeze, as you all know, last week. So we've gotten a lot of calls about specific plants. So I think this week we tried to talk about fig ivy, and what to do with your fig ivy. And the answer is nothing right now.
Nothing.
Wait and see. It should push out new foliage. So that, that was just kind of really started as just a way to get some content as a new business, and have some sort of Instagram presence, because we're competing with all these people that have beautiful work that's under construction, or it's already being published, and as a as a new business, you have nothing. So so there you go. Feature something that is useful for everybody. The hedge pledge, last year, with like all of the code rewriting that was going on, or maybe it was a year, I don't know, last year went by so fast, so it it was more than a year ago. I mentioned Lauren Stanley already, but she and this other woman and I started a nonprofit, or we were attempting to start a nonprofit, and then we kind of lost momentum. But it was called Living City ATX, and it was it started out as a supper series at Lauren's and Lars Stanley's studio, and just a bunch of people getting around and talking about the future and the greening of Austin. And from that, we kind of got tagged to become, these like a voice for trees during the LDC rewrite. And so we spent a lot of time working with the arborists and kind of similar to what AIA was doing, rewriting specific sections of LDC. And so from that, and also just from my experience working in Austin, I really saw that there's two problems in residential, there's always a lot of problems in residential landscape architecture, but two that really stick out in my mind, and that's impervious cover. And the other one is just like soils, like the quality of soil. So the hedge pledge is an incentive that I designed to incentivize planting a hedge rather than installing a fence. So it is, so the basic, the way the program works is that my clients, it's offered to all of the clients if they choose to go that route and plant a hedge. Then we track our design services for plant design separately, and they get an overall discount on that section of services.
Wow.
So it's really, it's like, well, I see a problem and what can I do about it? Not much, but I can control what's kind of coming into my office, and make a step, in the right direction in my mind that way. And the hedge, we had to help a couple people, decide to do it. And what it does is, one, it impervious cover a lot of times gets installed after, post CO. People come in and they put more pavement down. So if we have a hedge that takes up like a larger footprint, then all of a sudden, like that, just the border or that section of yard is no longer available for that post CO, impervious cover. It does improve soil quality. It reduces drainage issues, and it provides some variety. Right now I live on the east side, so all of these fences are going up everywhere, and it's just nicer to see something that offers habitat and a little variety.
Sure.
So that's where the hedge came from.
Okay. Wow, that's incredible. I don't know that I really understood the full depth of that, so thank you for sharing. That's wonderful idea. And really, I think what I really enjoyed about what you just said was just thinking about the things that you can control in your own office, and taking off little things that you can do that will set great examples for other practitioners to take forward into their own practice as well.
Yeah.
It also reminds me, just for anyone that's interested, my colleague and I, Arturo, took in the Alberto Colach lecture, the UT lecture that was earlier this week, I think on Monday. But I would encourage any of you to watch it. He's an incredible architect, but his entire presentation was about taking back over the green spaces. I mean, Mexico City has been completely deforested basically through development. And so he has this whole thesis about how he can start to create densification in development and hopefully regenerate some of these lost forests that have just been, decimated by huge amounts of development. So just a little plug for that for anyone that's interested.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, like this is like I came up with that idea. I would love it if other landscape architects and architects started implementing it. And I did talk to the watershed department about having, like, how do you go about having something like the Hedge Pledge as a pilot program? So, you right now there's rebates for installing irrigation, there's rebates for different things. So could there also be a rebate for the Hedge Pledge? And right now I'm just too busy to like run with it, but
sure,
there are things out there. So like if you have ideas, I think, go with it.
Yeah.
Approach the city.
That's great. That's great. Similar in terms of an Instagram campaign is your Sunday shout out series, which I find very inspiring. And what I like most about it is that you're highlighting people that are not necessarily even in either one of our industries, but they're just great people that are doing wonderful things in any manner of profession or platform. And, if you could speak a little bit about your inspiration behind creating that series and maybe how that reinforces your values and how it reinforces the positions that Shademaker takes in your everyday activities as a designer and as a constructor of things, how those people inspire you as well, such that you want to kind of share them with other people.
Sure. Yeah. It kind of, again, starting a new business and wanting some sort of presence. That's how it started. But it's not every Sunday. It tries to be every Sunday, highlight an individual or a company that's doing something that we're interested in. We want to applaud for their work. And it really starts, I guess the people that originally started out as kind of all women, but then I ran out of women, or I just started like thinking, oh, maybe it should be more inclusive. I didn't run out of women, but I think the idea is that I want to celebrate and be around people that are like-minded, that are collaborative, that are doing good things, and again, share information with each other. So that's kind of a baseline of who we choose to team up with. Honestly, we're at a place where in the office where we're pretty busy, so we can say you can be more selective with the teams that we join. And Genevieve and I have worked together for a long time, but really the people that we want to be with are not nice. We want to be with nice people that enjoy what they're doing. And so the Sunday shout out is just kind of that, that simple.
Cool. Okay, so maybe let's shift over to talking about running a woman-owned, woman-led, women-staffed office in Austin, Texas.
Right now.
And quite wonderfully, I might add. And obviously you're very successful, and from what I understand of your projects, you've been involved in some incredible projects, and I know will continue to be involved in some incredible projects. But just for those that may be, thinking about that themselves, or are planning for that for themselves in the future and stepping out on their own. I know we talked yesterday about some particular resources that you have found helpful to you, in terms of giving yourself access to projects. And I wonder if you could just share a little bit about your experience there.
Yeah, well, I think starting out, we have, everyone that's starting their own business has the same questions, like QuickBooks and different, software you should be buying and what's necessary and what's not. So I would say that, my approach to starting my office was just to ask everyone that wanted to answer what they were using, what was working for them, down to, should I use Gmail? Like, all these things we, can spend so much time researching and trying out. And so yeah, ask your friends, ask around. I think AIA also has probably a bunch of resources on how, to start a business. Earlier today, the landscape architecture group that I'm in, ASLA, the Central chapter, just had a series on how to write a good contract. So there are a lot of resources with ASLA and AIA that we can pull from. When I started Shademaker, I wasn't quite sure, at what level I wanted to be working at project-wise. So I thought it would be beneficial if I went through the process of getting my woman-owned business certification. And so I did that, and it was a surprising amount of paperwork. I think it's been simplified, but it took me a long time to get the paperwork done. And then once I did it, in theory, it hasn't really panned out for me yet. But in theory, any public project, that receives state and or city funding, or county funding for that matter, they have a certain percentage of the consultants that need to be minority or women owned. And so that was my thought, was that I would get that certification, and then I could collaborate on some of the bigger projects that I was kind of used to working on when I worked in Seattle. So I think that's a resource for a lot of people, because one of Sean's questions down on this list is like, how do we encourage diversity? And I think as having my own practice, I think there are a lot of ways to kind of answer that question. Because I'm the owner, I can do that. But I think, if you're starting your own business and looking for opportunities to engage and kind of change the face of architecture or landscape architecture, I think, get your certification, and then go after some of these older firms that might be more like older male dominant, and say, hey, like, you have all this experience. Would you put me on your team for this project? And so just really, be pointed in where you focus, your energies, because I think there's a lot of work out there for minority and women-owned businesses. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. So one question I've gotten just from our constituents in terms of collaboration is the question of when is it appropriate to engage a landscape architect in in the nature of the projects that we work on. We kind of barely have enough money to build the building. And we all know landscape architecture, rightfully so, is it's not a small cost. And I know that you've given me parameters in terms of just ballparking something to tell my clients, to expect. But as you've indicated, and as I've seen in many budgets from contractors, it'll be like landscaping $2,000, and it's laughable, right? But if on some of the larger projects that may have room, may have the flexibility to have a more robust landscape design incorporated into them, what is your advice to architects in terms of when they should engage a landscape architect to begin to become involved in the process?
Yeah, I think it depends on the project, right? But let's just talk residential for to start.
Sure.
So with residential design, my answer to that is the earlier the better. So what I recommend, or how I like to work, is that maybe when you're about 50% schematic design, in your 50% SD level, that then you start saying to your client, like, we need to get an arborist and a landscape architect engaged. The arborist, if you have trees that you're working with, and that, like, why I say SD level is, like, that gives us enough time to point out some things in the site that might not be, like, you might not be aware of. Like if there's a heritage tree at Shademaker, we've come up with some really cool pool designs and things that really push the bounds of what you can do around a critical root zone, but you're not too far into your house design to be locked into that. So I like to have a collaborative kind of charrette process early on, and then get the landscape concept in plan, and then I can go away for a long time. Like, you can do your DDs and CDs, and then we can come back towards the end and start, working on our package. With commercial projects, we were part of the team from the get-go.
Okay. So without disclosing too many specific details, so what would your approach be? Because on the limited amount of projects that I have worked on that actually have a landscape presence and a landscape architect involved, even those projects have kind of deferred to a later time. If I'm having that conversation with the client, they defer to a later time in the project. Well, I'm not ready to go down that path yet. But what, besides just my kind of, I guess my position can be, well, I have to convince you of the value of this right now, so that we can sort of get someone here that you can talk to. But do you have any tips on how to have that conversation with a potential client to say, no, we really do need to kind of get someone involved early, 50% SD, so that they can help guide us in some of our, architectural decisions as well?
Right.
That if you want to balk on that question, you can.
No, I think it's a great question. I think that, the pushing it. So there's no, like, fact behind what I'm going to say, but my gut response to this thought is that it actually could save you money by engaging us earlier in the design process, because we just see things differently, and we can also help you develop what your landscape budget is. And I think that's part of the problem with landscape architecture, is that in residential, it can change, like the soils change so widely across our city. So what maybe you designed down the street, and whatever landscape budget you had on that project might not apply to the project in South Austin. So I think having us engaged early, it's not like, especially if they want a landscape So it's like, well, you're committing to landscape, so engage now and get a better design that's integrated, versus engaging later, which is limiting for us as designers, and for the project, right? So it might not be like, it might not meet its greatest potential if the landscape is really like, okay, here's the leftover space, we left this for you, what do you want to do?
Right. And by the way, you have 25 square feet of impervious cover remaining.
Yeah. Right. I did work on a project where I got 1 square foot of,
Wow.
when I entered the project, there was 1 square foot of impervious cover. So yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that's well put, just in terms of, if they are, if you're having conversations and the client is mentioning, yes, I want, a landscape design, I want a landscape architect involved, then I think the narrative of, well, it's going to be the two sort of scopes of work will gel so much better if we do this now, and we don't wait to involve them and just have them show up and react to what is already in place and what is immovable at that point.
Well, and I guess I have a question for you. Like, why do you think there's this? Why do people perceive that it's better to wait to engage landscape architects?
I think it has everything to do with money, and they're thinking about the budget of the house, and I think they sadly, they view landscape as kind of, well, if we have enough money at the end of this process, and then we'll do that, then we'll think about that later. So I feel like people defer it for financial reasons, and some people may not necessarily need to do that. Some people obviously understand the value of landscaping and involving a landscape architect, but it still might not push them to kind of incorporate it into the construction budget, because they feel like they just want to know what the house is going to cost, and that they're just kind of laser focused on that. And then they, if things are going well, and I think people are tentative because the narrative, which is unfortunately sort of perpetuated by misinformation maybe, but the narrative is that I know this is going to be more than I think it's going to be. So if they have a pool of money that they think they might be able to use for landscaping down the road, I think they're kind of hedging, they're not, no pun intended there, sorry, but they're kind of biding their time to see if they're going to have to dip into those resources to get the house finished. I have no factual basis on that statement either, but that's the impression that I get. And I think it's, I think that is, financially true for a lot of people that are, trying to get a house built for their family, and kind of the loan that they can get will really just get them kind of the conditioned space to house their family comfortably and provide them with the program that they need, and they kind of have to see what comes later. And myself included, my yard is horrible. But it's just how it is for me, I guess. But
I think this is
yeah,
a great opportunity for us as professionals to collaborate and educate our clients, right?
agreed.
So if you have a client that's pretty stern on not engaging in any other disciplines until they have a budget, that they can finance. I think, like, as an architect, like, it would be a great service to me that you're like, well, okay, here's the napkin math for the house, and then here's a realistic landscape budget. Because what I see, or have seen in the past, is that when I come on to a project that's really late in the game, so the house is being built, there's an area to be landscaped, and there's a line item that the contractor or somebody has put in there for landscape allowance, and it's like $20,000. Like, well, that's gone in the, that's an irrigation system and a driveway, or it's pretty minimal. So my request, I guess, would be that, like, I'm happy to give you napkin math on how to budget for a landscape, but my rule of thumb is, like, take the lot size times $20, and that's your landscape budget. If you want a well done landscape that, like, my company is going to design, and it's going to be installed professionally, it's going to have a pool, it's going to have irrigation and lighting, all that kind of stuff. The other way of doing that napkin math is, and maybe anybody feel free to correct me, but I think it's like a percentage of your overall build, right? So if you've got if you have a $1 million home that you're building, then I want at least 10% for the landscape budget, if not 20, right? So those are realistic landscape numbers.
Okay.
And that's for realistic for the city of Austin.
Sure.
If you go out, it's different, it's less. And it's even, we're working right now with a company from Houston that's doing a project here, and they are like shaking their heads at the numbers that I'm providing them. I'm like, well, that's what it costs here. And they're like, wow, okay. So it's more expensive to build in Austin than Houston right now, I guess.
Yeah. Than anywhere in the state, as far as I know. Kind of crazy. Okay, well, that I agree. I mean, I think teaming up on this narrative of sort of early engagement, and have them go ahead and include a real number in their budget when they're going to the bank, is a great way to at least try to get the clients to bite on that process, on that integrated process, so that the two of us can work together.
Yeah, it's a big chunk. It's a big chunk of change, So I think.
Yeah, it is.
My preference is always to discuss pricing up front. So at Shademaker, we do our own internal price check at the end of schematic design. So once the concept has been approved by the client, we'll price it just so that they know what we're looking at. And I started doing that because I realized that people, landscape architects included, just don't really understand the price of what we're designing. So it's an internal check to make sure that, if they told us that their budget is X, that we're meeting the X. But it also, because landscape is the last thing that's installed, more often than not, the client really loves the plan and the concept, and they can't afford it. And so that budget check gives us the opportunity to work with the contractor and say, okay, like, let's do phase one, and then we know what these different items are going to cost, and it makes sense to do them in this order, and we can push these other things to phase two.
Okay, makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about kind of this collaborative idea between the Central Texas chapter of the ASLA and AIA Austin, and how we might begin to be better partners moving forward, and try to cross-pollinate as much as we can, share information, be as open source as we can between our two organizations. What do you have some thoughts on how you feel like that can be achieved, or how to maybe start the dialogue between our two entities here, such that we can I mean, even just the conversation about, or what we just talked about in terms of how to present the idea of bringing on a landscape architect sooner in the design process, what are other benefits that you see between combining our two endeavors?
Yeah. Well, I think Lauren is still on here. So Lauren and I are right now, we're serving on the Central Texas ASLA, so American Society of Landscape Architects group. And this group, since I've been in town, has really not been very active. And so Daniel Woodruff, Lauren, and I, and then even the chairs from last year really started to step it up. And this year we decided that we would just copy AIA Austin's format. Really, it's such a great, like, there's so many great things happening at AIA Austin. So we're like, well, this form work is working. Let's copy it. And so we've developed, we have divided, or I guess programmed 3 subcommittees. So we have advocacy, education, and membership, and practice. And so, advocacy might be more in alignment with the COAT group, and we're trying to kind of monitor what you guys are doing so that we can have a seat at the table. We can contribute to those LDC rewrites, but we can also just be out and about and sponsor each other's events and go to I forget what it is, I've participated in them before and I'm just forgetting, but where you go, you have like a lunch and learn, you go to a project, and it's sponsored by the door people or whatever, like, could the landscape folks sponsor one of those?
Sure. So that sounds great.
So yeah, we're trying to, it's been a weird year with COVID, so everybody's on Zoom, but we are working on having quarterly virtual tours. So we have one coming up. Oh shoot, I forgot to write down the date, but it's in March. And it's a virtual tour and lecture series, I think, of the Waterloo Park that's going to open just west of I-35, and then I think we're targeting about 4 lecture series like that, of that scale, throughout the year. And so I think there's a great opportunity for everybody to learn a little bit more about what landscape architects are doing in the city. But we don't want to just be all parks and big projects. We'll also be highlighting some of the smaller works that are being installed. The AIA women's group, like the women, you had a meeting this morning. Right now, we don't, in the landscape group, we don't have that. But I could see, because we're just starting this and it's all, it's all volunteer time. I could see in the coming years that we'll start to have subcommittees, like as maybe practice, maybe there's a women's section.
Sure.
But we're open to you guys attending our lectures and our events. And I'm a sponsor of the AIA. I think it's really important that we, if you have the funds, to support each other. And the homes tour is really how I got introduced to AIA Austin, and that's such a great event. So I volunteer for that.
Okay. And do you have what I guess we would just go on to the ASLA's website if we wanted to. Can we donate specifically or become a member, I guess, of specifically the Central Texas chapter in terms of supporting you?
Yeah, so let me get back to you on that. Like our website is not really it's not very intuitive, and it needs some updating. But I know that we are collecting sponsors right now for scholarships. So let me do a follow-up on that.
Okay. That sounds good. Well, I will continue to promote your events through the Small Firms Roundtable. I sat in on the presentation earlier today about the contract documents, and there was certainly a lot of overlap in terms of understanding. So I know we share some of the same small business functions, of course, that can be applied to both of our disciplines. So I'll continue to promote those, and I would encourage anyone that's on the call today to join those, because it was very, very informative, and kind of made me think twice about my contracts this morning. I actually looked at one after that to see if it had some of the language, which I don't think it did, but
I was doing the same thing. I was writing a contract while I was watching and listening. I was like,
I'll add that.
Yeah, let's include that. Yes, yeah.
Well, you had some incredible guests. I mean, not only was it informative, but it was quite entertaining as well. So that was a bonus.
Well, I think so. That one, I don't know. I know that a couple of the people on this call were on that call. So it was about contracts and protecting yourself in your contract. We do have a couple others that we were talking about yesterday, getting more technical. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if we would have one next quarter that maybe talks about like insurance. So we're gonna, but I'll keep you posted. And I don't know, maybe I'll just deliver that information to you, and you can discuss.
Sure. And we can also look at opportunities to collaborate on those as well, because of course we get a lot of those same questions, right? We need to learn about insurance. We need to learn about contracts. And so I think it would be a great opportunity to share that information with both groups. So I think the one kind of last question, we're getting pretty close on time here, and I do want to open up the floor, of course, for any questions, but we touched on this a little bit earlier, but just the question of how can what can be utilized in the practice of landscape architecture to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, and talking about the or civic projects that you can become involved with, especially through the path of the woman-owned business, I believe could provide you with an opportunity to be engaged in civic culture to a larger degree. And I feel like a lot of the stakeholders in our city institutions are quite diverse in their leadership. And so I think that could be an opportunity to, be in an environment that is already by default pretty diverse in and of itself, and expand your network. And I think I'm harking back to the conversation we had with Donna Carter last month, where she likened it to just making friends in kindergarten. I mean, that's what we need to all be out there doing. And so putting yourself in a position and amidst a group of people that you can introduce yourself to and become friends with is a great way to do that. I think also your office is a wonderful array of diversity in and of itself. And I think we talked about just what that can do, being a leader of a small firm and having the power to hire a more diverse group of people to join you and to collaborate with.
Right.
Do you have any other kind of thoughts on that?
Sure. Obviously, as the owner, I get to decide, who we hire, so that there's opportunity to have inclusion in that regard, which is probably the biggest impact that I can have as an employer. But then, as individuals, so everyone, obviously, there's more opportunity as an individual for me to get out into our community. And so, there's ACE mentorship, there's K through 12 programs. I think Daniel Woodruff was saying that I forget which one it is, but he's reading books to kindergartners, I think. So it could be really simple, make friends with kindergartners.
Yeah.
But, I think there are a lot of other non-architecture, non-landscape architecture opportunities as individuals that we could participate in. So mentoring. And I think that as white people, we have to recognize that we have a privilege, and the only way that I can do anything about that is give back to my community, right? So I can volunteer and I can employ, and that's, if we all do a little bit, then I think it starts to shift that needle in the right direction.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, well, we just have a few minutes left here, but I do want to give anyone on the call an opportunity to ask any questions, make any comments, whatever suits you. So I'll just, as a guru said this morning, I'll just let the silence be here for anyone that wants to chime in.
Cool. Somebody's raising their hand. Hugh.
All right.
Yes, hi. Yeah,
Thank
sorry,
you.
I missed the first half of this. So I just didn't really have any questions since I didn't hear the first half, but thank you all for hosting this. I think, I've always had a real interest in landscape, and it's such an overlap. And I really appreciate the community here, where there are a lot of landscape architects who enjoy the collaborative approach, because it's really tough. I say to the clients at the beginning, we really can't design a house without starting to design the landscape. And we also we appreciate it enough to know what we don't know. Like, it's such a special thing that I would never want just to say, we can do it all just for our ego or something, and really wanting to bring in people who we know can make it even better, because it can make or break a project. You could have a really simple, okay, kind of building somewhere and have beautiful landscape, and it's great. Or conversely, you could have a wonderful piece of architecture, and if the landscape isn't thought about, then, that's something. And also, I've noticed in the past week, I don't know how many people have the same feeling. I walk to work sometimes through Clarksville, different neighborhoods, and everyone has their own neighborhood, of course, but it's just like, it feels sad, like all these plants. There are these agaves that have melted, these beautiful, tall, prickly pear cactus, and you realize, wow, it'll come back, and I'm optimistic and everything, but it's just the difference that it makes, when you see when it's dead and kind of gone. And, again, it'll come back, and it's hopefully a rare occurrence. But I also just wanted to kind of tell a quick anecdote to that last issue that y'all were talking about. Is I volunteered at this COVID vaccination site down in San Marcos last night. And one of the guys was helping direct traffic, and he's an intern at UTSA in criminal justice, but wants to maybe go into EMS or something. And so he's helping me basically move traffic cones, and we were just chatting for a bit. But he goes, "Oh, you're an architect. Like, what does an architect do?" And he's graduating from college. He grew up, his parents, mom and dad, were both in the Air Force. So he lived in Okinawa, Japan. He lived in Germany, different places. So, and he's a bright guy. But he's like, well, what is an architect? Well, it's an engineer. Like, architects help figure out how to make, the structure of the building, right? And, it's something you take for granted, and then you realize that it's sometimes it's a small elite, I guess you could say, bubble. And for me, it's all about you don't have to make the whole world and every culture appreciate what the architecture culture appreciates. But at the same time, I think that it is sort of our role, like you say, just anyone you meet, so just one conversation, I was trying to explain, what is it we do? And I said, well, it's really more about imagination, thinking of things. And then it's a whole thing. You can't say one is more important. But, from my perspective, I wanted to let him know that it wasn't simply, figuring out the structure, because it's there's so much more, and I can babble on right about it, but it just hit home, it's one little touch point of just how many people really don't have any sense of the world of architecture or design. And not everyone ultimately needs to appreciate it like a connoisseur by any means, but I think the more people just get education, but early, it's educating the public as much as hiring people in your firm and having people it's both, but I have to say that it's almost more important to have the population as a whole appreciate and understand it than they can. And then I think it'll follow with, like, this guy would never have an interest in being an architect, and maybe he never would, right? But if you don't even know what the profession is, then why in the world you would never think to go to architecture school or landscape architecture? And that was really something that early on is what my sense is if you kind of wait just to say, okay, I'm going to hire someone and let's get a mix of people, there really aren't a lot of options on who to hire, and that's, starting young, starting early, and a bigger, broader kind of generational shift is needed, in addition to the day-to-day kind of situations.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because yesterday Sean and I were talking before this talk, and I was making the comment that I've been doing this 20 some years, and I've gone to the ASLA conventions for a majority of that time, and I can see a shift in the landscape, like the diversity of landscape architects coming up through college, and it's really exciting, because I used to go and be like a handful of women in the audience, and now I'm filled. The audience is full of diversity and youth. For a long time it was just it was all white and all old. So it's great to see some diversity. But I do think you're right, Hugh, that it starts young.
Agreed. Thanks, Hugh. Anyone else like to chime in or have any questions?
I saw that there's some links that are in the chat. So
is that where Anissa, is that do you have a slide to throw up maybe, so we can put these?
Does everyone see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess, can we put these in an email or something where people would have easier access?
For sure. Yeah.
To them? Okay.
Yeah. So this is just the links to the things that we spoke about. So the Hedge Pledge and Sunday Shout Out are on the Instagram feeds. But then the bottom two are if you want more information about how to apply for the minority and women-owned business certificates. There's the SMBR office is a great resource. They'll walk you through the whole process, what you need to do. So I really encourage you to do that if you can, and if you qualify. And I think it's a great networking tool if nothing else.
Great. Thanks, Shaney, for providing that information, and thank you, Anissa, for coordinating the dissemination of that after the talk.
No problem.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us kind of late on a Friday. I know it's going to be a little bit rainy this weekend, but certainly that's an improvement over the past weather that we've had. So I hope everyone has a safe and happy weekend. I want to give one more shout out to our sponsors: Mendus Services, Syntex Sash and Door, and Knight Construction. As always, we're very appreciative of their support of the Small Firms Roundtable, and I think we look forward to additional collaboration with the Central Texas chapter of the ASLA, and look forward to seeing more great work from landscape architects, both in our own projects and just in projects beyond. And I look forward to those tours. Those sound those sound like they'll be pretty fun.
Yeah, we'll be sure to invite you.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Sean.
Have a great weekend.
Bye, you too.
Bye.